feeling kind of intimidated a bit that people have come to hear me all the way from Eritrea and Kenya and Chicago and Salem, Oregon, and thought I was just going to be preaching to new heights. But apparently, and to top that off too, we're having our driveway resurfaced actually tomorrow. And apparently, I must have been wearing a mission T-shirt or something, because the guy shows up a couple weeks ago, gives me all these bids and stuff, and sends me the information. And then a week later, the other guy that's going to be doing the actual work calls me, and he says, "Now you're a preacher man, right?" I'm like, "A preacher man?" And I'm thinking, where did he get that? And then I was trying to explain, well, actually, I am preaching this coming Sunday. And it just got really confusing. So I am a preacher now. They're giving me the preacher discount on the job and everything. So it's really, really kind of nice. So let's pray. So Lord, we do ask you to be with us as we go through Psalm 63, a great psalm and a great prayer, and just ask you to bless the time we have here. Amen. So I'm going to be speaking on Psalm 63. I don't know when was the last time any of you looked at that, maybe 10 minutes ago. But Psalm 63, Micah gave away about half of my sermon earlier, but Psalm 63 was written while David was in the desert of Judah. And just be clear, this was not a day trip. This was not a field trip. This was not a camping trip. This was not a fun time just to get out and go see the local sites and like visiting the local national park or anything like that. Commentators and scholars, there's some difference of opinion as to when this took place, when David was in the desert, but I kind of lean toward the explanation that he was in the desert while he was fleeing from Absalom, his own son, who was trying to kill him. And that's not a good place to be while you're trying to flee from your own son who's trying to kill you. But what David was experiencing was, in many senses, really a living hell. I'm going to read from Moody's Bible Atlas. It talks about where David was. As he proceeded out the landscape that he was in, the landscape became harsher and more rugged. It is bare rocks and wide stretches of loose, broken stones, washed free of soil. That's what it is. It's only just a few miles out of Jerusalem, but the wilderness of Judah begins. It is a genuine desert. It is not just a little bit dry. We think we've had it a little bit dry. This is a desert. It is solitary, howling, rough, and rocky wasteland that is nearly devoid of all plants and animals, and virtually without rainfall. It's one of the driest spots in the world. Geologically and topographically, it was a horrible and is a horrible place to be. David was separated from his nation. He was separated from his kingdom. He was separated from his family. And his son Absalom, definitely for one. He was separated from many friends and confidants. And we can go back and read in 2 Samuel 15 and 16 about that time in his life. It was not a pretty time. So that's just the backdrop for Psalm 63. So I'm going to read Psalm 63 again. We're going to dissect it a bit, and then we're going to look at it again as a whole, and then we're going to come back and wrap up with a prayer that is built upon Psalm 63. So let's read it. And it says, I'm going to go with that. "O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My body longs for you, in a dry and weary land where there is no water. I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory. Because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with the richest of foods. With singing lips, my mouth will praise you. On my bed, I will remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night, because you are my help. I sing in the shadow of your wings. My soul clings to you. My right hand upholds me. They who seek my life will be destroyed. They will go down to the depths of the earth. They will be given over to the sword and become food for jackals. But the king will rejoice in God, and all who swear by God's name will praise him, while the mouths of liars will be silenced. So let's go through and kind of start parsing that out a little bit. It starts off, it says, "Oh God, you are my God." Oh God, you are. And as I was reading this, it got me to thinking sometimes there's fun things that go on in our language, but I got to thinking that what David is saying here, he's saying God's name in a different way. Because what is one of God's names? I am. God says, I am. And here David's saying, you are. It's just a different form of God's name. He is recognizing who God is. And it's really just 4 words into it. Oh God, you are my God. He is calling out to someone who is near, dear, and very personal to him. And it says, earnestly I seek you. David is making God the first thing and of highest importance. He's recognizing that. Another translation says, early I seek you. Early, that is the first thing in the morning. It's the first thing in his walk with the Lord. It's the first thing in his life that he is seeking the Lord. And then he says, I thirst for you. Now, have any of you ever said, gee, I'm thirsty? Have any of you ever said, wow, I am just dying here. Man, I'm dying. I need something to drink. David is saying that and literally meaning that. It's a graphic picture that David is dealing with. Out in the desert, they are frantic to try and find any sources of water. It's literally a day-by-day thing to have and to thirst. And David is saying, but I'm thirsting for you, Lord, as much as I am thirsting for literal water out here in the midst of this desert. Then he goes on and says, what does it say in this verse? I've seen you in the sanctuary, I beheld. But it says, one version of this, it says, my whole being longs for you. And another translation says, my flesh longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water. Again, David's speaking from his very personal, real experience. We've had that struggle where we're going, how many of you ever said, I'm starving? What's for dinner? I don't know, and maybe that is somebody's experience, but has anybody ever been literally starving? That's a conversation I've been able to have with some of the people I work with at the mission. Some of them have been in that spot, literally starving, not having eaten for days. And the mission shows up in a van and says, do you want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? And that is life-saving. That's what David is dealing with right now. He has fled. He didn't get to take his camper with him. He didn't get to take his Coleman stove and cans of food or anything. He had to get out of Dodge as quick as he could from his own son. So, verse 2, it says, I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and glory. I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory. But where's David at? He's in the desert. It seems that David understands, though, that you can see and you can experience God without needing to be in the temple. David understands that. And that's a pretty radical concept if you are a Jew living 1,000 years before Christ came. You needed to go to the temple. The temple was the place where you had to worship God. You had to go there. Make your sacrifices and worship the Lord. But David understands truly what it is to be able to worship the Lord without needing to be in the literal temple. Again, what a radical concept to be in that spot for him. Be in that spot for him. So verse 3, it says, your love is better than life, and my lips will glorify you. Your love is better than life. You remember, David is in a spot where he is kind of literally hanging on for his life. But he's going, your love is better than life. Do you see how personal this is for David? He's living this right now where he's like, his life is in the balance. He fully grasped how great God's love is, and he knew that he still received God's love in spite of his many sins. David was a man that had many, many sins in his life, but he keeps praising the Lord out loud and with hardly anybody there but God to hear. In verse 4, it says, I will praise you and I will lift up my hands. David's going to keep praising God in word, with his lips, and indeed with his hands. Now he's going to be out there, oh Lord, I will praise you as long as I lived, and in your name I will lift up my hands. There's nobody to see him. There's nobody around to go, why you don't need to lift your hands. Nobody sees you but God. And he's acknowledging God. We should be that way. If we're feeling that call in our life, it took me a long time to get to that point in my life where I could lift up my hands and praise the Lord. But we need to be in that place where David was, where I can do that in spite of what's going on around me. Verse 5, it says, my soul will be satisfied as with the richest of foods, and with singing lips my mouth will praise you. I will be fully satisfied. It's a recurring picture of what David's dealing with, because he is not fully satisfied. He's barely getting enough to drink, and he barely has enough food. Somehow he's getting by. But he says, I will be fully satisfied as with the richest of foods. This is like I got a big, nice chunk of prime rib. It's nice and marbled and just perfectly roasted over the fire. That's the picture he has. That I will be satisfied like that. And verse 6, on my bed I remember you through the watches of the night. Now, sorry, I'm going to pick on you, Melissa, for a moment. You were saying you didn't sleep well the past night. David is not sleeping well every night because he's sleeping on rocks. It's hot. Who's been to Arizona lately? Yeah, you've been to Arizona. Was it hot down there? And did anybody hear? They had a record high low a few weeks ago for the night. The nighttime temperature dropped only to 97 degrees. We'd be dying if our daytime temperature got to 97. That was how cold it got one night, 97 degrees. Very similar to what David is dealing with. And he's saying, on my bed I remember you through all the watches of the night. How many watches are there every night? Is there 3 watches? I think there's 3 watches, or is it 4? I can't remember now. I think there's 3 watches through the night. I think each of them are 4-hour periods of time. David is awake each of the watches, not just the first watch. He says, I am thinking of you through the watches of the night. All of the watches of the night, I'm thinking about you, Lord. And you know what? If I might as well spend some time worship you and thinking of you and pondering who you are. So David is thinking of God even when relaxing and going to bed, but perhaps it's really not so relaxing because he is tossing and turning throughout the night. He's awake all 3 of those watches. But last part of verse 7, he says, I sing in the shadow. One of the versions, it says, I sing in the shadow of your wings. Now, I am real confident that this is a figurative form of speech, not a literal. I don't think God literally has wings. But how many of you have ever raised chickens? You guys have? Do the little chicks kind of hover around mom, and does mom kind of keep track of them? Yeah? Luba, was it you that raised your hand? Yeah. The mom is there to kind of guard those chicks and take care of them. David has that word picture, and he understands that. He's probably thinking of a chicken dinner too, but I don't know. But I will sing in the shadow of your wings. David was able to sing and praise the Lord independent of his own personal comfort and ease. He would say, I can sing in the shadow of your wings, because he knows God is there for him. His personal comfort and ease was not happening. It was not happening. It was something that he could do, not just when things were going well, but also when everything was being stripped away from him, and he felt like God was hiding from him, but he still knew that he could hide in God's wings. I have to kind of wonder at this point if David is kind of looking back and going, Job, I kind of get you, Job. I understand your story. Family being stripped away, everything I have is being taken from me. On to verse 8. It says, my soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. The clinging is tight. There is no space. This is not the man hug where you go, yo, dude, kind of, or we do the handshake and we do the brotherly shake. This is clinging tightly together. There's no space between the two of you. Have any of you ever parachuted? Oh, couple okay, yeah. Have any of you ever done a tandem parachute where you're parachuting with another person, like the guide that takes you? I've never been parachuting, but I can imagine that if I was on an airplane and there were two of us left and the plane's going down and there's one parachute and the other person has the parachute, I can imagine that I would cling tightly to that person as we were going to jump out of the airplane. And I'm hoping that they would cling as tightly as possible to me as well. Now, I think that's a scene out of the movie, and I'm not sure how that really works in real life, but you get the idea of that clinging to somebody as tightly as possible. That is what David is doing. I am clinging to you, Lord. And then he says, your right hand upholds me. Now, even in our culture today, how many of us are right-handed? And how many of us are left-handed? There's a few of us. Amen. All right, let's hear it. We are all in our right mind, so let's hear it. But the right hand was considered the hand of skill and strength. David understood that, and having used his right hand to slay Goliath and many others in battle. But right hand was considered the arm of strength and power. And he says, your right hand, God, will uphold me. Verse 9 and 10 says, one version says, those who want to kill me will be destroyed, but they who seek my life will be destroyed. They will go down to the depths of the earth. They will be given over to the sword and become food for jackals. Now, I read this, and for me, a close read of this shows that David's trust is in God. David is not asking to be the one who will bring the judgment. He's just saying, I know they will go down to the depths of the earth. I know they who seek my life will be destroyed. And I don't think David's saying, I know I'm going to do it or anything like that. He's trusting the Lord to take care of those that are his enemies. And when he says they'll become food for jackals, here's another incredible picture. One, he's talking about food again. Do you see a theme in here? Water and food, but food for jackals. Jackals are the garbage cleaners of the battlefield. They're the last ones to come in and ravish and destroy the carcasses the human bodies after a battle. Not a pretty picture. But the jackals leave very little behind. I think David is saying, Lord, I'm going to trust you to take care of them. Those that are out to get me, I'm going to trust you to take care of them. Verse 11, but the king will rejoice in God. And I was thinking about this, assuming this is when David was fleeing from Absalom. One of the other commentaries did talk about the idea that it could be that it was David fleeing Saul many years earlier. Saul was out to get David, and he had to flee for a while until the Lord took care of Saul. But regardless, when he says, the king will rejoice in God, who's the king? David? David's the king. But I think David also recognizes who the real and ultimate king is. The real and ultimate king is the Lord. So, I've gone through these verses, kind of parsed them one by one. And for me, it was really helpful. Helpful just to understand and get a picture of what's going on in this psalm. But there's a bigger picture that I don't want us to lose, in that this psalm really is an amazing and easy read as a prayer. In fact, so much of Scripture is that way, and virtually all of our psalms are that way. We've talked a lot every week now. We share what it is to be in prayer, and we read the Lord's Prayer together. But want to remind you what prayer is, and we see in this prayer that prayer is abandoning your place in the center of the world and daily surrendering that place to God alone as an act of heartfelt worship. David is surrendering his place in the world, going, Lord, I am all alone, I'm all out here, and I'm acknowledging you, God. He's clearly gotten himself out of the way, immediately seeing and acknowledging God as more important than his own life. There's a devotion I read every day, New Morning Mercies, and it talks about prayer, and it has 6 points about prayer. Prayer is surrender to the reality that there is someone more ultimate than you. And I think David gets that. There is somebody more important than me out there, and I know it's you, Lord. Prayer is surrender to the reality that life isn't just about you. David understands that. Prayer is surrender to the reality that you need help. David totally understands that out in the wilderness. Prayer is surrender to the reality that there is wisdom greater than yours. Lord, I understand you are the one that will be taking care of my circumstances here. Prayer is surrender of your rights to live as you choose. I don't think David chose to be out there in the wilderness. It was the only place he could go to get away from dying and being killed. Prayer is surrender of your hopes to God's grace. David is out in the wilderness going, how am I going to get restored to my kingdom? I have no idea how that is ever going to happen. Prayer is much more than bringing to God our list of wants, desires, and needs. It is a radical act of worship that reminds us of who we are, who God is, and what life is all about. And David could do that in the harshest, most difficult circumstances around him. Micah, do you know who John Chrysostom is? He was an early, important church father from the 4th century. He was known as a very elegant speaker. His Greek surname means golden mouth. This guy spoke really well. That's kind of irrelevant. Anyway, he readily appealed to the common people. He was not a highfalutin theologian or an intellectual elite, which was very common back in the 4th century, as Dan may remember. And but listen to this. He ordained, sorry about that, Dan. Just want to make sure you were listening back there. He ordained that all Christians should not let a day pass without publicly reading Psalm 63. He recognized and knew it was a psalm and a prayer that we should all be saying, and he said we should all read it every day, publicly and out loud. Prayer is, and it's perfectly acceptable to be, but prayer is a time to ask for God's protection and provision, but that's not what it's all about. It's also a time to make it a time to share your heart's desire to be with God. Because we talk about asking for God's provision and protection, but we need to also have our heart in the right place, that we are there to be with God and to be in God's presence. You can use Psalm 63 as a model of prayer when you're seeking to be with and talk to God and rediscover another wonderful way of worshiping the Lord. So I'm going to read a psalm, a prayer that was based off of Psalm 63. I'm going to read this as a closing prayer. It is essentially equivalent to Psalm 63. It is about 11 passages long. So you can close your eyes if you'd like. You don't need to, but listen to this as a prayer drawing from Psalm 63, recognizing who God is, and I will read this as a closing prayer. Good and sustaining God, who first chose me, you are the treasure I seek, the end of all my longings, a thirst I cannot quench, an ever-present hunger, for I am a beggar at the door of grace. What mountains we have stood upon together, my soul swept up in a cloud of glory. The heavens opened as I beheld your face. It's a distant memory now, a vague recollection. Still, I would rather face death, disappear from this world, be utterly forgotten, than to suffer separation from you. The dim glory of the past is stronger than this momentary affliction. Lord, help us in our times not to have those when we are in the midst of momentary afflictions, to be like David and to remember you. As long as I have breath in me, I will sing your song, faith fanned into flame, strength renewed as I run this race with my eyes fixed on you. My bed has become an altar. Lord, let me in the midst of the night watches use my bed as an altar to worship you. A temple of sacred memory. In waking, in dreaming, speak to me. Guardian of my soul, unraveler of the confusion around me, lifter of sorrow. I am a child. I am clasped to my mother's breast, cradled in the arms of love. I trust that all that stands against me, all that is godless, graceless, hell-bent, will be swallowed by the grave, a slow and painful death. Good and sustaining God, the ground of all my hope, the seat of all my desire, I lift my hands, I lift my heart to sing the glories of your grace. Your words are in my mouth, a living language, the native tongue of new creation. Your truth will be revealed, and evil will fall prostrate before it. Amen.